want to show you this full continuum measure because I want you to be able to understand the parts of this measure so that when we do rating with fidelity, you'll know the different parts that we're looking at as we are working through the continuum levels. So up here at the top on yours, you have developmental domain, LLD, language and literacy development. That is our domain. In the system, they've made that shorthand, LLD5, but that is your domain. Underneath that, we have LLD5, interest and literacy. That is your measure. So that's what you're really looking for under language and literacy. Underneath that, we have the definition. A child shows interest in books, songs, rhymes, stories, and other literacy activities in increasingly complex ways. So if you look at the bottom of your handout on the left, there's a vocabulary box. Feel free to jot down or to pick in those bubbles that we have as to where the domain, measure, and definition are. So after you have that on this level right here, these are the developmental levels. So WestEd and Child Plus, we have, WestEd has created a continuum, and it's Child Plus, we've supported that in our DRDP online with Child Plus Mobile. So we're starting with responding earlier, and we're building all the way up to integrating earlier, which is preparation for kindergarten. So these are our developmental levels right here on our continuum. So then we want to get to the meat and potatoes. So right here we have descriptors of what each one of these areas looks like. So for responding earlier or early infancy, for interest and literacy, we have attends to or responds to people, things in basic ways. Let's bump up to integrating earlier. We have initiates literacy activities that relate to classroom experiences as well as to own experience or interest. So it just shows you what the descriptors are for each one of these areas on the developmental continuum. Underneath that, there are actually examples, so you know exactly what these look like in the classroom as you're looking for examples and observations. So this is going to show you a little bit more specific. In addition to that, the State of California's Early Childhood Online provides an inter-rater reliability certification that goes along with the DRDP that's going to allow you and your staff to be able to make sure that they are familiar with the DRDP and go through the inter-rater reliability. But Carolyn's going to show you about how to use observations to rate with fidelity. And just so you know, there are 4 different types of observations: a note, a photo, a video, or a file. And so she's going to show you some examples of observations next. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
All right. As Jessica mentioned, I'm going to actually go through what we're going to actually do is rate 2 measures for a specific child. So we're going to rate Joey Abner, who is an early Head Start child, and we're actually going to rate him for 2 specific measures. So the first measure that we want to look at is under the Approaches to Learning Self-Regulation domain. If you notice here, we have this little box and it says 2 in it. And basically what that's doing is it's telling me the number of observations that are tied to this specific measure. So I'm going to go ahead and I am actually going to click on the number 2. So just as Jessica had showed you earlier, you're going to be able to see my ATL Reg 1, which is my domain, attention maintenance is my measure, and then my definition. So I'm going to read that to you all. It says, child develops the capacity to pay attention to people, things, or the environment when interacting with others or exploring play materials. So these are our different developmental levels. And as we mentioned, Joey Abner is an early Head Start child. So with that said, we're going to start from the left. That's going to be your early infancy, and then all the way to the right is where you'd be preparing for kindergarten. We have our descriptors here for each of the developmental levels. And in addition to that, we also have some examples, as Jessica mentioned earlier. So let's scroll down a little bit. And we have a few other options here. So you have where you can rate some children, child is not yet at the earliest developmental level on this measure, or if a child is emerging to the next developmental level, or we're unable to rate this measure due to extended absence. So I want to scroll down and I actually want to take a look at the actual observation that I have that's tied to this specific measure. We're actually going to look at this one. So let's read that for you. And it says, Joey was crawling on the rug. He moved to a toy of interest. There was an adult nearby to show Joey different ways to use the toy. For example, making noise, turning it upside down, etc. And there's our wonderful little photo of Joey. So let's scroll all the way back up and let's take a look now at our different developmental levels. So the very first level is going to say, for responding earlier, attends or responds briefly to people, things, or sounds. And these are going to be my examples below. So pays attention to a moving mobile, quiets to the voice of a familiar person, gazes at the smiling face of a familiar person. And so here, it's looking like Joey can do more than that, because based off of our observation, Joey was crawling on the rug, he moved to a toy of interest. So let's go back up and let's look at our next developmental level, which is responding later. So let's look at that descriptor, and it says shifts attention frequently from one person or thing to another. And so for our examples, it's giving us turns attention toward an interesting toy, then back to an adult or child, actively shifts interest from one child to another, playing close by. Now, Joey is definitely doing these things, but let's just take a look at our next developmental level before we try to go ahead and rate him, because we really want to make sure that we have selected Joey at the correct or the appropriate developmental level. So under exploring earlier, we have where it says maintains attention on own or with adult support during brief activities. So our example is briefly watches other children playing and then resumes play with a toy. Resumes playing at sand table when adults are joining, and we definitely know that that's something Joey is doing. I want to point out to you some other things. So notice there's some developmental levels that are grayed out, and the reason why it's because we want to make sure that they're appropriate, developmentally appropriate based off of the child's age. So I just wanted you to be aware as to why that is. Now, before we select exploring earlier, because it definitely looks like that's where Joey is, there's the exploring later developmental level. And it's saying maintains attention with adult support during activities that last for an extended period of time. Well, we don't really have any evidence to really support that. So, but it looks like Joey's kind of emerging into that next level, but we can't say that he's there yet. So we're going to select that he's exploring earlier, and I'm going to scroll down and select he is emerging to the next developmental level. And I am going to select save. So when I do that now, you'll notice the green check mark next to my attention maintenance measure. Those were our observations, and we've rated Joey at the exploring earlier developmental level and emerging into the next developmental level. So now we're going to take a look at the next measure that we want to rate Joey on, and that's going to be page 6 of your handout. And we're going to look at the physical development health domain, and we want to specifically look at our gross locomotor movement skills. And let's take a look, just like we did before, at that box that has the 1 in it, okay? So here we have our gross locomotor movement skills measure, and let's take a look at the definition. So it's saying that the child shows increasing proficiency in fundamental locomotor skills, for example, rolling, crawling, cruising, walking, running, jumping, and galloping. Again, we have our developmental levels, our descriptors, and our examples. Let's scroll down and take a look at our actual observation. Well, what do you know? It's the same observation that we had previously. So one of the things to note is that you can have one observation that's tied to multiple measures. So let's go back and let's take a look at our developmental levels. So let's start again with our responding earlier. And it's saying moves in basic and often involuntary ways. So it's saying Joey turns his head in response to stimulation or nourishment, turns head to seek source of stimulation or nourishment. Well, Joey's doing a lot more than that. He is crawling on a rug. He's playing with a toy independently. So let's move on to our next developmental level. So this one is saying moves two or more body parts together, often with intention. And I'm at my responding later developmental level. And so it's saying turns head and reaches for a toy, kicks at a mobile while lying on back, rolls from stomach to back. Again, Joey's doing even more than that. So let's go ahead and let's look at our next developmental level. Let's look at the exploring earlier. So this one is saying coordinates movements of body parts to move whole body, such as creeping, crawling, or scooting on bottom. And so our examples are creeps and crawls towards a familiar adult, moves from lying down to a sitting position. Well, Joey's definitely crawling around. He's playing with the toy. Sounds like exploring earlier is a good level to place Joey at, but actually we want to go to our next developmental level, which is going to be exploring middle. And so here, let's see, it says coordinates movement of whole body while upright using support. So taking steps sideways or forward while holding on to furniture, walking forward steadily. Now going back to our observation, we don't see that Joey is doing any of that quite yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to select Joey at the exploring earlier developmental level, and I'm going to go ahead and select save. And notice that I have my green check mark to let me know that that measure has been rated. And then we're at the exploring earlier developmental level for gross locomotor movement skills. So now that we've gone ahead and we have rated two measures for an early Head Start child, I'm actually going to turn this over to Jessica, and I'm going to have her go ahead and show you one for a Head Start child.
All right, so I'm showing you a little bit about Sammy, who, like Carolyn just told you, is our Head Start child. And I'm going to show you a little bit about English language development. So one of the great things about the DRDP is it syncs with Child Plus. So if you put it in Child Plus, it's automatically in the DRDP. One of those things that we've pulled is English language development. So if you have a child that has selected that they speak another language at home other than English, and they're dual language learners, the English language development, ELD, will automatically show up for that child. And this will allow you to answer the questions about receptive, expressive, understanding and response to English literacy activities, and symbol, letter, and print knowledge in English. So these 4 questions will automatically show up for these children if you've selected that they're a dual language learner. So that's one step you don't have to do. You don't have to find another evaluation or another evaluation system for them. You don't have to put them in another program. You don't have to put them in another software. They're all right here for you with Child Plus. So what we're going to look at today on page 7 is self-expression in English or expressive language. So Carolyn showed you this number 2 right here means 2 observations. So I'm going to click on it. And then I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to see my 2 observations. So just like Carolyn was showing you with the previous observations, this observation right here actually goes to numerous measures. So you can see more than one measure with this observation. And we have our observations pictures, and we have tools, and we have notes. So we're going to look at this first one. It says, Sammy and her peer were in the grocery center. Sammy was pretending to be a cashier. She was naming items as she scanned them on the register. If she did not know the word, she looked at the teacher for prompting. So I want you to note the words right here, naming items. Then for this one, it says Sammy is speaking English with her peers, BN and MN. So I want you to just note that she is speaking English right here. So I'm going to scroll back up. Now, Carolyn showed you the continuum. For English language development, there's a separate continuum, starting with discovering language, all the way to the developmental level of integrating English. So let's look at our descriptors real quick. So for discovering language, we have uses a few words or word-like sounds to gesture to communicate in home language. It builds all the way up to communicate in English using complete sentences about a variety of social and instructional concepts and topics. So we know that Sammy is talking with his peers, and we also know that Sammy is naming items that she's playing with the cashier. So let's go through here. It says uses a few first words or word-like sounds in home language. We know Sammy's home language is not English, but Sammy is actually using some English words. So we've mastered discovering language. The next one is discovering English. Communicates in home language or non-verbally or both. So we know that Sammy can communicate in language as well as non-verbally. The next one is exploring English. Communicates most competently in home language, occasionally using single words or short memorized sequence of words in English. So let's look at that one because it says that she uses single words, and we know that when she was naming items off the cashier, she was saying words. So let's look at what that looks like on our examples. Communicates in English by when a peer is leaving. Says good morning in English during the daily morning song. Says the end at the end of a story. So we know that Sammy probably could do that based on what we've read. The fact that she's having conversations with her peers as well as naming items on the grocery list or grocery basket. So let's bump up to developing English. It says communicates in English using single words and common phrases. May mix English with home language. So we've got the single word, and she's having a conversation with her peers, so she's probably got common phrases. Let's see what it looks like. It says communicates in marker to ask for a marker when from a peer when playing restaurant. So there's some active play. Communicates in English, I do a house while painting. Communicates my turn on the slide. Communicates the dog lady, the dog turned into a lady in English, while helping her put on a dress on the stuffed animal, and again in that play center. So I'd say she's definitely able to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and put the DV here, but let's jump up to the building English like Carolyn showed us to do. It says communicates in English using sentences that may be incomplete. It says communicates to a peer while playing with Play-Doh. I make cookies in Spanish and pan bread in Spanish. You like it? So she's having a conversation, so she might be able to do that. Communicates to a peer, come, I show you, and brings the peer to a child's cubby where the child takes a stuffed animal out of the bag. Well, we know she's conversing, so she might be able to do that. Communicates in English, the lamb licked my hand when you're at a petting farm from last weekend. And then communicates, my dad rides a pig in English, and she means horse, while attempting to draw the horse. So based on what I've seen in my observations, I know she can come up with single words and phrases. But I don't really have any observations or any data to support the fact that she's speaking almost in using sentences. So I'm going to go ahead and depict this developing English. But because of what I'm seeing down here with having conversations with her peers, I'm going to go ahead and select the emerging, just like Carolyn showed you to do in the other one. And I'm going to say that she's working towards building English, but she has mastered developing English. So just to remind you about the inter-rater reliability, just so that you're not overwhelmed with trying to remember these examples, the state of California does provide a DRDP inter-rater reliability that will help you get accustomed to the different levels. So I'm going to hit save. Just like Carolyn showed you, when it turns blue, it means that we have rated it, and it has the green check to show that it's been rated.